A reminder that now that my name is Leslie Kuhn, and I'm the president of the League of Women Voters of Newcastle.
You can't hear.
Is the mic on?
Could you speak up? We can't hear you.
Hi. We'll start over. Good evening.
Good evening.
My name is Leslie Kuhn, and I'm the president of the League of Women Voters of Newcastle. I'd like to welcome you, our in-person and webinar audience, and our candidates to the Candidates Forum for New York State Senate District 40. The League of Women Voters is a nonpartisan, grassroots political organization of women and men. This means that the League does not support or oppose one candidate or political party over another. We are dedicated to the active and informed participation of citizens in government of all levels. The League works to educate voters, increase understanding and debate on major policy issues, and influence policy through education and advocacy. The League takes positions on policies, not candidates or parties. Working since 1920 to protect and expand voting rights and ensure everyone is represented in our democracy. The League is fully committed to ensure compliance in principle and in practice with our national organization's diversity, equity, and inclusion policy. And membership is open to everyone 16 years of age or older. This candidate forum is a collaborative effort with other leagues in SD40 to help constituents learn about the candidates in this race. You can find other information about the candidates and what will appear on your ballot this election season by visiting vote411.org. We thank the many SD40 constituents who submitted nearly 100 questions to our question committee for tonight's forum. The committee worked hard to identify the range of topics that were of interest to the community and to compile a list of questions to cover as many of those as possible within a time frame that is reasonable for all participants. This evening's proceedings are being taped by Newcastle Community Media Center and are being live streamed on YouTube. Thanks to Carrie and team for helping to facilitate. Beginning tomorrow, a recording will be available on demand at nccmc.com and on YouTube on the NCCMC channel. All other recording is prohibited. Any public sharing or rebroadcast of this candidates forum should be in its entirety and unedited. Thanks to our timekeeper tonight, League member Mary Kirsch. And many thanks to our moderator for this evening, Michelle Shivers. Michelle is a member director of the League of Women Voters of Rye, Rye-Brook, and Portchester. She will now go over the ground rules for tonight's forum.
Good evening, everyone.
Good evening. Good evening.
Good evening. It is my pleasure to be here, and in accordance to league policy, I am not a voter in the New York State Senate District 40. Tonight, we have two candidates running for the New York State Senate District 40 seat. In alphabetical order by last name, your candidates are Gina Arena and Peter Harcum. Before we get started, I would like to go over the ground rules that apply to this evening. The order of opening statements has been determined by lots that were drawn before the meeting. The order of closing statements will be in the reverse order as the opening statements. The order in which candidates will respond to further questions will be rotated by the moderator, myself, to assure fairness. Throughout the forum, no comments of a personal or abusive nature will be permitted. The moderator has the authority to pause the proceedings and to enforce the ground rules and format. Each candidate has up to 1.5 minutes for their opening statement. We will then move to questions submitted in advance by voters in SD40. Candidates will have 1.5 minutes to answer each question. The timekeeper will indicate when 30 seconds remain in the allowed speaking time and stop when the time is up. Each candidate is entitled to two 30-second rebuttals during the question portion by raising their hand and the conclusion of the response. Questions from the audience and SD40 were submitted prior to the candidates' night, this candidates forum, by email or electronic form. The audience will not be able to submit questions during this live event. We are here this evening to hear the candidates' view about issues concerning SD40. And it is important that we give each candidate the opportunity to make the best use of the time allotted for this forum. We ask that the audience refrain from reacting to a candidate's response and request that you hold your applause until the conclusion of the forum. We remind you that no campaign material of any kind may be distributed in this room. At the conclusion of the question period, each candidate will give a closing statement of a maximum of 1.5 minutes. As the moderator, I will reserve the right to allow rebuttal of the close if warranted by the content of any closing statement. Rebuttal will be 30 seconds. Let's begin with the opening statements. Our first speaker is Gina Arena. Please hold the applause until the conclusion of the forum. We thank you in advance.
Good evening, everyone.
Good evening.
Thank you to the League, Senator Harcum, and everyone who came out to be here tonight. I'm Gina Arena, and I'm running for State Senate to do everything I can to help lower costs for my neighbors, some of whom are really struggling. I ran for this seat 2 years ago and got 47% of the vote. I'm respectfully asking neighbors who didn't vote for me last time, but are unhappy with the continued direction of this state, to consider voting for me this time. I am pro-woman, pro-girl, and pro-choice, and the theme of my campaign is Mom on a Mission. How could it be anything else? I'm a mother of 8, 6 girls and 2 boys. And like all moms, I see the world through a mother's eyes. I've founded two small nonprofits for the families of children with autism and those suffering from life-threatening illnesses or injuries. But those came about because of my children as well. I'll speak more about all of that in a bit. Albany needs to get its priorities straight. It wastes money on nonsense while New Yorkers in real need get left behind. I am also leading the effort to defend girls' sports in New York, which are under threat. Thank you for being here to listen to us. Thank you.
Please hold the applause. Thank you. Peter Harcum.
Good evening, everyone, and thank you to the League. Good evening, everyone. Gina, good to be with you again. 6 years ago, you elected me to the New York State Senate because the Republican majority had blocked progress and opportunity for millions of New Yorkers. We passed a Reproductive Health Act to defend reproductive health care freedom, something my opponent opposed. We passed common sense gun safety, like red flag laws, expanded background checks, something my opponent opposed. We fully funded foundation aid, bringing back $210 million in education funding back to the district. And yet we always keep an eye on affordability. Cut middle class taxes 5 times. We now have the lowest middle class tax rates in 70 years. We capped property taxes. I cut small business taxes. We, in the midst of the pandemic, passed my bill into law granting our small businesses $1.2 billion in grants, not loans, but grants. Brought back $30 million in discretionary funding to our municipalities, our nonprofits, our first responders. 8 million of that went to our first responders. $280 million in road repairs, real investments in this district. So I've got a record that I'm proud of, and I look forward to discussing more of that with you later this evening.
Thank you. Now let's begin the questions for this evening. Mr. Harcum, what do you believe are the most important issues facing SD 40?
Right now, certainly affordability, as we have discussed. We've cut taxes both for middle class taxpayers and for small businesses. By bringing back more education aid, that takes the onus off of property taxpayers. Yes, it lifts our students and our teachers, but that's $210 million less you're on the hook for as property taxpayers. The same with the $30 million in discretionary funding we brought back to your municipalities for important infrastructure projects like parks, police cars, ambulances, radios. In fact, right here in Newcastle, we're funding the police department for 2 motorcycles for their patrols. These are things that take the burden off of property taxpayers. So we're constantly trying to find ways to make things more cost effective. One of the big ones that we did was we doubled the senior property tax deduction so that seniors on fixed incomes can stay in their homes. That's huge, especially as we lack the appropriate life cycle housing in our communities. And I'm sure we'll talk more about housing, but raising the threshold on the property tax cap for seniors was huge.
Thank you. Mrs. Arena, same question.
Can you just repeat it, please?
What do you believe are the most important issues facing SD 40?
So I will have to agree with the senator that affordability is one of the top priorities. One of my questions for in this topic is in the 6 years that this senator has been in the state senate, 5 years, the past 5 years, the budget has gone up $60 billion. I'm here because I want to represent the people. The people out on the ground, when I'm knocking doors, are talking about the fact that they can't afford to choose between paying for their oil or paying for their pills, especially the seniors. This to me is a huge problem in this district, and I'm very concerned about the affordability.
Thank you. Ms. Arena, what is your plan to make New York more affordable?
I would like to first look into the budget and look at line by line and start to try and find out what we're spending so much money on. I'm very concerned about the $2.5 billion that are going to be going towards the illegal immigration. We have children who are disabled, we have seniors, we have veterans who are not getting nearly any amount close to that amount that's being used for the illegal immigration. I think we need to get rid of our sanctuary status and worry about the people that live here right now who are suffering in their own right. It's time that we take care of New Yorkers and we stop worrying about everyone else at this moment.
Thank you. Mr. Harcum, same question.
Thank you very much. It's interesting to hear that my opponent's concerned about us investing $60 billion more in the people of New York and then wanting to cut and saying we're not spending enough. The math just doesn't work. But let's talk about the immigration challenge that New York faces right now. Where was the outrage when Republican governors were illegally sending tens of thousands of people against their will to New York? Where is the outrage when the Republicans who represent New York in the House of Representatives refuse to provide funding to care for people who are coming into our municipalities and provide that relief to the taxpayers? Where was the outrage when the Republicans in the House of Representatives, on Donald Trump's orders, refused to pass a bipartisan immigration reform bill, which would have finally fixed our broken immigration system? So as a person of faith, when we have people living in our community, I feel I have an obligation to provide food, clothing, and shelter. That's what we do in New York. But this was a problem that was completely generated by a broken federal government and a broken political system where people put politics over people.
Thank you. Mr. Harcum, what is your position on bail reform in New York State?
Sure. Right now, the last 2 years, crime is down significantly in New York State, according to the FBI and the DCJS. In fact, today, MTA announced that crime was now beneath pre-pandemic levels. But let's talk about what makes safe communities as opposed to crime. The 3 counties I represent, Putnam, Westchester, Rockland, are 3 of the 10 safest counties in the United States of America. And why is that? Because we invest in good schools with robust after-school programs. We have access to healthcare, we have access to housing, we have access to transportation, and we have a robust social safety net. That's what makes safe communities, along with good police departments. We have tremendous police departments here, and I'm proud to fund them. As I said at the beginning, $8 million to our emergency first responders. So what we need to do is to continue to invest in those other communities that don't have the benefit of that. And rather than just saying when the statistics no longer meet the narrative that, oh, the police are no longer reporting crime, that's an insult to the police professionals. Crime is down, and the reason is we're investing in the things that make holistically safe communities.
Thank you. Ms. Arena, the same question.
So first off, yesterday while we were at a forum, we had the pleasure of Susan Cacase, who is running for Westchester County DA. She was there, and she admittedly said at that forum that crime is up in Westchester County. So I don't know where the facts are coming from, but in some research that I did today, the New York State Division of Criminal Justice Services Uniform Crime Reporting System says that actually the crime is up 30%. The reporting has been skewed, and all reporting has not gone to the FBI like it should have been going. Total index crimes from 2021 to 2023, total crime surged by 30% from 9,285 to 11,992. Violent crime is an 18% increase. Burglary and larceny rose by 29%. I don't understand how my opponent can say that crime has not gone up. I think every person who lives in Westchester, Putnam, and Stony Point can all agree that when they are watching the news, they can see that crime has gone up. Even in their own local municipality, they can see that crime has gone up. We need safety for the people of this Senate district.
Thank you. Mrs. Arena, do you believe that climate change is responsible for increasing weather-related disasters? It's a 2-part. And what is your plan to address and mitigate human contributions to climate changes?
I do believe that climate change has played a part in the recent storms and the increase in the weather. Can you repeat the second part, please?
What is your plan to address and mitigate human contributions to climate changes?
That's a good question.
You should start.
I've never really honestly thought about it. Some things that I personally like to talk about are we use way too many chemicals in our environment, which change the structure of our environment. I'm a beekeeper. I worry about our bees. We use Roundup incredibly, and I don't feel that it is needed in our environment. I would like us to start getting away from so many different chemical reactions. I also believe in composting. I have a garden in my yard, and I try to make sure that we live as clean a life as possible. And I try and teach my children the same thing. And I think we are all responsible for that on this planet.
Thank you. Mr. Harcum, the same question. Would you like me to repeat it?
No, that's fine, thank you. As chair of the Committee on Environmental Conservation, I think about this every day. This is our job to think about this every day. We pass the toughest climate protection legislation in the country to transition from fossil fuels, which are killing this planet, which are generating climate change and the storms that we are witnessing, into a green economy, also creating tens of thousands of good paying jobs. I wrote the labor standards for the Climate Action Fund so that when the cap and invest proceeds go into there, this will be a pathway to good paying union jobs, middle class jobs with community centered solutions. Climate change is something that impacts us every day. Since I've been a county legislator and now 6 years in the Senate, we've rebuilt the grid in this area 4 times because of the impact of storms. Last summer, we had a forecast of chance of a pop-up thunderstorm. We had 8 inches of rain in 3 hours in the western part of the district, destroyed Bear Mountain Park, the Palisades Parkway. We had whitewater rescues. The cost of not acting on climate change far outweighs the cost of acting on climate change.
Thank you. Mr. Harcum, many voters say that abortion is a priority issue in this election. What is your position on a woman's right to choose, and has it changed over time?
Thank you. As a father of 2 daughters, my opinion has never changed. I've always been solidly in favor of reproductive healthcare freedom. In fact, that was one of the issues I ran on 6 years ago. We passed a Reproductive Health Act. Again, my opponent opposed that. We passed a Contraceptive Care Act. We've also passed legislation after Roe v. Wade was overturned to protect women who come to New York for reproductive health care freedom and access, as well as the healthcare providers. And this year, reproductive health care will be codified in the Equal Rights Amendment. Again, something that my opponent opposes. So I have been endorsed by Planned Parenthood. I've been endorsed by WCLA Choice Matters. Abortion is definitely on the ballot this election.
Thank you. Mrs. Arena, the same question. Do you need me to repeat it?
Yes, please.
Many women voters say that abortion is a priority issue in this election. What is your position on a woman's right to choose, and has it changed over time?
My position on women's reproductive rights has not changed over time. I have always believed that it is not my business to make choices for other women. I, for myself, as my own being, feel that my choice has been pro-life. And I say that because I have 8 children, and this is what I've chosen for myself. But again, I do not feel that I have the right to tell any other woman how she should deal with her doctor in the doctor's office. When it comes to the codifying of Prop 1, which my opponent was just discussing, it's so much bigger than just abortion rights. It's talking about force spaces and opportunities, including sports prisons, locker rooms, and domestic abuse shelters meant for women to include men.
She's got 30 seconds more.
Oh. I thought you were raising your hand for something. I'm very concerned that this Prop 1 is open-ended and will have results of many lawsuits and many difficult situations for the future for women.
Thank you, Mrs. Arena. Mr. Harkman, do you have a rebuttal?
I do, thank you.
30 seconds is the rebuttal.
Very quickly, first of all, referring to trans individuals as boys and men is insulting. As the New York Times reported yesterday, this is out of the Ted Cruz playbook. We're better than this in New York State. Prop 1 says nothing dealing with this issue. It simply codifies existing rights in New York State. And finally, if you're really concerned about women's and girls' sports, you'll vote Democratic because Donald Trump and Project 2025
Thank
are
you.
going to eliminate Project
Thank you.
2025.
The next question. Mrs. Arena. The State Board of Regents recently postponed consideration of a mixed competition regulation. What is your position on mixed competition, including the rights of transgender individuals to play sports?
So in my reading of that did not include transgender. That was a discussion based on, or legislation based on if there was not a boys sports team, as in field hockey, a boy would be able to bump a girl and try out for the team, and this really had nothing to do with transgender. I don't have an issue with transgender. So I'm not quite sure where that fit into this question, but I support keeping men out of girls' sports. That's what I've said all along. And when are we gonna start sticking up for our girls here? What happened to all the feminists? Where are they?
Thank you. Mr. Harkman, the same question.
Sure, for many seasons, I was a girls' soccer coach in the town of Lewisboro. Had that been a co-ed team, I would have happily coached that team. Town of Lewisboro started a co-ed softball team. What happened? Little League participation plummeted because parents wanted their young people in co-ed sports. That's an option for localities, that's an option for school districts. Nothing in that proposed regulation, and it was proposed and it was tanked, by the way. So, just like people can complain about, oh, so-and-so proposed a bill in Albany, there are thousands of bills proposed every year, and most of them don't get voted on. But if local districts and local communities want co-ed sports, I'm not gonna stand in the way of that.
Thank you. Mr. Markham, do you support or oppose November's ballot Proposition 1 and why?
Yeah, as we discussed before, I do support Proposition 1 because it simply does two things. It codifies reproductive health care freedom in the Constitution, which we've already passed into law. It's just not protected in the Constitution. And then also, if you look at the Constitution, the second part, currently in New York State, race, religion, creed, and color are the only four things. We have passed over decades numerous protections for people with disabilities, seniors, women, national origin, the LGBTQ community, and we're simply codifying that into the Constitution so that if we have folks in Washington who are running now, who are proposing a national abortion ban or these ridiculous trans bans that we're seeing in southern states, New Yorkers will be protected here at home.
Thank you. Mrs. Arena, the same question.
So I'm opposed to Proposition 1. I'm very concerned about the open-endedness of it and where it could lead us. And just so people know, I did some research. And if this is enshrined into New York's Constitution, Prop 1 would force spaces and opportunities, including sports, prisons, locker rooms, and domestic abuse shelters meant for women to include men, harm the safety and security of our communities, dissolve parents' rights by allowing minors to transition through life-altering drugs and surgeries without parental involvement. Let it be known, there is already legislation worded to allow minors to elect medical treatment and surgery without parental consent. Please note that it is Assembly Bill 6761. So people do need to be aware that this has already begun even before this has been put into legislation. And it's a great concern to many families, and the highest of lawyers have already said this will be a open box to lawsuits that will last for a long time, and if this gets codified into law and enshrined, it's gonna take a really long time to undo it, and we might be making mistakes that we haven't fully talked about yet.
Thank you, Mrs. Arena. Next question. We will be starting with Mrs. Arena. What is your position on battery energy storage systems, BESS, and the deployment of this technology all throughout the country, but specifically Senate District 40, it keeps going. How would you respond to constituents' concerns about the sitting of a BESS facility in their neighborhood?
Well, I have already dealt with this situation. There is a proposed lithium battery facility in the town of Carmel on the border of Somers. We have openly supported that this should not go through. This would have been a 116 megawatt battery facility. And it was 200 yards away from backyards of families' homes. It was put smack in the middle of all of Mayapack and all the businesses. This would be detrimental to the area because it's not when this catches on fire, it's sorry, I said it backwards. It's when it catches on fire. And we have to protect the ground, the air, the soil, the water. And if these catch on fire, you cannot just put them out with water, they have to burn out. There is a 1 mile radius for people to evacuate and then a 4 mile radius to shelter in place. This is very dangerous to the environment and to the population. And the Carmel Town Board has made it a 6-month moratorium on this issue, and now we're waiting for a final.
Thank you. Mr. Harcum, do you need me to repeat?
No, we're good, thank you. In the big picture, we need battery storage to support the grid. New York State does not tell folks where these systems should go. New York State does not get involved in anything, housing, economic development, energy, unless local approvals are in place. Now let's unpack this a little bit because my opponent and several Republican officials have been screaming at New York State that this is somehow a state conspiracy to put this in the town of Carmel. Well, let's look at the results of Freedom of Information Act emails that came out yesterday. That as early as 2019, officials in the town of Carmel were colluding with the developer to put this in the town of Carmel to maximize the property values of a town board member's family who owns the property. 2019, behind closed doors, without public input, and these are the same officials the local control crowd wanted to give the discretion to as to whether they were protecting Somers residents or not. So you want local control, be careful what you ask for, because the foxes were guarding the hen house. I had proposed a solution where the State Office of Residential Energy Siting would be the arbiter of cases like this, where there are 2 or more municipalities involved. The folks of Somers would have had a voice that way.
Thank you. Mrs. Arena, you want a rebuttal?
Yes. So you pulled back legislation that was going to take away local control from the town of Carmel. And regarding the email that you're talking about in 2019, that I saw that as well. And that goes back to one board member. And some of the other board members that are currently on there were not part of the board in 2019. So I don't know where you think that makes all of this okay, but you've tried many times to take
Thank you, Mrs. Arena. Thank you. Mr. Harcum, next question. What is your stance on affordable housing in New York? Do you believe that the state has the right, responsibility, or expertise to override local zoning?
Thank you, good question. We have an affordability crisis in New York, and one of the major reasons is because of the lack of supply. Single-family zoning has constricted supply. It's simple economics. You constrict supply, the cost goes up. In New York, we have a robust $5 billion capital plan to support affordable housing. The way we need to get there is through incentives, things like the Mid-Hudson Momentum Fund, which is a $150 million fund for just us in the Hudson Valley for infrastructure and housing. On top of that $5 billion fund, we've gotten over $10 million for the village of Ossining for upgrades to their water sewage treatment plant. We got $15 million for the city of Peekskill in order to upgrade their wastewater infrastructure to accommodate more housing. So the way to do it is through incentives, I believe. The governor tried a heavy-handed plan a couple of years ago. While I support affordable housing, I did not support that plan. I felt incentives were the way to go, and I feel like we're moving in a more appropriate direction.
Thank you. Mrs. Arena, the same question.
Can you repeat it, please?
What is your stance on affordable housing in New York? Do you believe the state has the right, responsibility, or expertise to override local zoning?
So I do believe that we need to start creating some affordable housing, but taking it out of the local control would, in my eyes, would be wrong. My opponent did create legislation to create accessory dwelling units as well as transit-oriented development, which was turned down by all of the local towns because they did not want to lose control over the local control over these facilities that were being proposed. So, and also, people don't want their skyline to change. They've moved up here to have where they live be kept the way it's lived. They want to have a say in what goes in. So in order to preserve that, we should not be pushing state legislation.
Thank you. Mr. Harcum has a rebuttal.
Thank you very much. Just very quickly, fact check, I did not write the legislation for transit-oriented development. That was the governor. Another fact check, my accessory dwelling unit bill is now the law of the land in New York State. Why? Because I went back and I worked with local municipalities, and municipalities like the Westchester Municipal Official Association, who were originally skeptical of the legislation. We addressed their concerns. They were strong supporters. This is a great way for our students to come back, our first responders, our seniors to stay in the community, low-hanging fruit.
Thank you. What will be your
Who's this to?
I'm sorry?
Who's this to?
Thank you.
Sorry.
This will be to Mrs. Arena. What will be your priorities if elected?
My priorities would be due to the fact that I have a disabled child. I have a daughter who suffered from opioid addiction. I lost a son to brain cancer. I also have a daughter who is a veteran of the United States Army. My priority is to start making sure these people are taken care of and making it affordable to live here. This is third generation for me in this district, and my children can't afford to stay here. And that was one of the biggest reasons I decided to run. I'm also very concerned about mental health as well as the opioid addiction crisis. My daughter had a relapse last year, and while I was trying to get her help, I was informed that her opioid addiction does not fall under mental health. And I could not get her into a program in New York State because she didn't have a mental health issue. She had an addiction issue. And to me, these are priorities. We have enough things going on with fentanyl crossing our border and so many things that we're not taking care of. And these are things that I have studied for many years because of my children, and we need to fix them. We need to make sure that our families are taken care of, and that should be a priority.
Thank you. Mr. Harcum, same question.
Absolutely. I just want to say that as someone in long-term recovery myself, my first 4 years in the Senate, I chaired the Senate Committee on Alcoholism and Substance Use Disorders. We fixed a broken system. We increased funding by 50%. We put much more of an emphasis on co-occurring disorders because Gina is correct. There is a nexus between mental health and self-medication for substance use disorders. We passed numerous pieces of legislation to break down barriers to evidence-based treatment. And for the first time, overdose deaths are coming down significantly because of the investments we made and the laws that I passed in the 4 years that I was chair. In the 6 years I've been in the Senate, I passed 113 bills into law. I passed many more, but those were the ones signed into law. It's in the top 10% of everyone in the New York State Senate. As we just discussed, many bills on the opioid crisis, on climate change, protecting our water quality, protecting our veterans. We work very actively. We work very energetically, and you know, we've got probably about another 100 bills that we're carrying, getting ready to introduce next year on all of the same topics.
Thank you. Mrs. Arena has a rebuttal.
Yes, so then why do we still have people suffering? Why do we still have these issues going on? I'm very confused as to why we've passed all of these things, but people are still having trouble getting the services they need. We have up to a 10-year waiting list for adults with autism to get into a program. That's not helping families who are not going to be able to take care of their child. And their child is also going to lose a parent someday.
Thank you, Mrs. Arena. That concludes the question portion.
That was fast.
Now it is time for closing statements. As I said earlier, closing statements will be given in the reverse order as the opening statements. We ask that the closing statements be about what you will bring to SD 40, not against your opponent. If we believe that there is an attack, we will allow a rebuttal. So we will begin the closing statement with Peter Harcum.
Well, thank you again to the league, and thank you, Gina. Tonight you've heard very clear differences between the two candidates. I'm running on the record of results that I brought from the last 6 years. We talk about affordability, cutting middle class taxes to the lowest rates in 70 years, cutting small business taxes, capping property taxes, doubling the senior property tax exemption, protecting reproductive health care, investing in education, investing in our infrastructure, investing in our first responders. These are results that come through hard work, not to mention the 17 food drives that we've had in the community, the dozen Narcan trainings, the dozen blood drives that we've had, the 1,000 families we helped to get unemployment benefits during the pandemic. This is what our team, and it's not just me, I have 12 dedicated professionals who are public servants as well, I'm proud to manage who work for me. And this is a dedication that we brought to the district and to the people of New York. I hope you see that, and I hope you support me in early voting. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Please hold that applause.
Wait,
Thank you.
No, no.
Thank you. Please hold the applause.
We just have to.
Thank you. Gina Arena.
Yes, I wanna thank you, I wanna thank the league for sponsoring this debate, and thank you Senator Harckham and everyone here. I'm going to close with a simple statement. If we keep sending the same people to Albany, we're going to keep getting the same results. It's worth me saying again. If we keep sending the same people to Albany, we're going to keep getting the same results. If you've been satisfied with Albany for the past 6 years, Pete's your man. But if you're not, I'm your woman. I'm a pro-choice mom on a mission to lower costs and to inject a booster shot of common sense into the state legislature. With all due respect to Pete, the incumbent does not reflect the mainstream views of the constituents. I do. I get what they're going through because I'm one of them. I'm an everyday mom. Mr. Harckham's unbridled progressivism has damaged this state. It's certainly made it harder to live here. Cashless bail, sanctuary state policies, a congestion pricing tax, lithium battery farms in our backyard, multifamily apartments in single-family neighborhoods, they all add up, and everyday people like me have had enough. If I'm fortunate enough to be elected, my door will always be open to you. Thank you for listening. I'd be grateful for your vote.
Thank you to both candidates for the A reminder that this forum was videotaped and will be available. Thank you. We have more. Just give us a few more moments. A reminder that this forum was videotaped and will be available online beginning tomorrow. I also want to remind you of the unique and important role played by the League of Women Voters here in the community and all across the country. The League's work includes registering voters, educating voters on the issues of today, and protecting their rights. And protecting their right to vote is vital to the strength of our democracy. Our local league is made up of volunteers who devote their time and energy. Your participation and assistance is always welcome, and your financial contributions would be appreciated. Remember, democracy is not a spectator sport. We encourage everyone to vote. Early voting for this election starts October 26th and ends November 3rd. Election Day is November 5th. Thank you again. Have a wonderful evening.